Welcome to SF Commercial Property Conversations with Bruce Bean, where Bay Area investments meet expert insights. Get ready to unlock the strategies of commercial real estate success.
So today I'm very happy to have David Greensfelder on, and he is a retail specialist. So David, it's great to have you. If you can just kind of go through your history a little bit of working for Longs and starting from wherever that began and before that and onward to where you are now, that would be great.
Sure, and nice to be with you here. So I'm originally a Midwesterner, transplanted to California, and as I like to say, I wasn't going back to the Midwest without a round trip ticket after I started school out here. But I started in commercial finance and very quickly moved over to commercial real estate. Thought I wanted to build great big office buildings, but a factory outlet shopping center developer hired me. So 35 years later, here I am as a retail guy. So I worked my way, through the ranks and ultimately ran corporate real estate programs for a number of regional and national retailers. Most of which have fallen by the wayside at this point, as has happened with a lot of retailers. And for the past, pushing on 15 years, have run my own consulting firm, Greensfelder Real Estate Strategy. And I think simply put, what we do is try to help define a place brand and then translate that place brand into a master plan and recommendations and strategies that talk about the consumer experience on the ground level. So we work nationally with institutional owners and developers across the country on these sorts of plans, everything place-based, of course, and just having a ball. Love to be all over.
So do you end up flying back and forth a lot? What's your travel schedule?
My travel schedule is a little bit less hectic than it was before COVID because we've gotten used to doing so much virtually. And so whereas I used to fly across the country to give a city council presentation, we all understand that hour can be done virtually in some cases, and stakeholder interviews, same way. But, travel is one of the best parts of this job is I get to go places, many that I'm familiar with and many that I become familiar with. And so I'm gone, fairly regularly. I'm working in Los Angeles remotely for a couple of weeks. But while I'm in Los Angeles, I'm going to be headed up to Oregon real quick to work on a project. So, it keeps things lively. And my kids are grown and at school still, so I have a lot of flexibility to do that now.
So what would you say is there a average or typical type of project that you work on?
So on the public sector side, where I'm working for a city or a county, or some public agency, the project typically ranges from working on some sort of master plan, whether that's a specific plan or general plan, as we call them in California, or a comprehensive plan, as it's called many other places, corridor studies, economic development strategic plans. And my role always is to be the retail expert on those projects, and that creeps out of what's obviously retail. It creeps into mixed use and how to incorporate retail successfully into mixed use projects, how to create thriving downtowns. I'm doing a lot of downtown work right now. And then on the private sector side, it tends to be institutional owners who are trying to make sure that they're getting it right. So where a lot of the institutional work might be, a large mixed use district and people are focused on the office or the residential, my job is how does that project meet the ground? and what do the behaviors look like at the ground? How do we create vibrancy? And more importantly, because these projects are built to last more than just an economic cycle, how do you design them so that they have resiliency across multiple economic cycles and through retail trends that haven't even come to be yet?
Oh my goodness, yeah. And the retail trends tend to shift quite quickly, or at least that's my view of it. I mean, one group will be very hot for a while and then it all disappears.
So I think that that's absolutely true, but I think there are also some trends that we can count on and that we need to make sure we really pay attention to. And they might not be the most interesting ones, but they're really fundamental. So, for example, retail needs to reflect consumer behaviors. And we all shop on our route, for example. So how much of your daily needs consumption happens because your spouse or partner says, hey, can you do bup 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 on the way home from the office or on the way to the office? And so we tend to fall into habits. So we're really looking at consumer behaviors and how consumer behaviors intersect with retail trends, intersect with demand, and intersect with the built environment. So when all of those things are really brought together into a single plan, we're able to create recommendations and able to create master plans that really have that are very compelling for the long term.
So I'm curious, we have a development just a couple blocks from us here, which has a Beach Hut Deli. I suspect you know that name, perhaps. Kind of a smaller franchise group that's in California that does kind of nice deli work. Anyway, they're in the corner of a building, a mixed use building of probably, I don't know, maybe 50 apartments on top of it. And then next to Beach Hut, there originally was a Starbucks that came in. But then when COVID happened and the WeWorks across the street kind of went dry, that Starbucks left, and there was a women's boxing group there for a while. Anyway, my question is, here's a mixed use development. It's got one tenant in the bottom, and then the entire rest of the first floor is vacant, basically, and very nice retail space, but they don't seem to be able to attract anybody there.
So one of the things we end up talking about a lot with clients, whether they're public sector or private sector, is that retail is not the only way to activate the street. And, if I would like to say that if you were to take a half a dozen people that do what I've been trained to do over the past 35 years and set us loose in a place that none of us had ever been before with a very specific requirement. Like where's the best place for tenant X to go? We, in theory, all should end up standing on the same quadrant of the same intersection before we're done.
In theory.
in theory, but I want to say in practice that happens also. And so I don't know exactly where this mixed use project you're talking about is. And perhaps, part of the problem is that things have changed because of COVID. And, we don't have return to work that's bringing the amount of footfalls onto the street that the project originally anticipated. It could be that the project was not designed entirely correctly so that retail could function on the ground level. So we end up talking with clients a lot about creating retail ready space. And it could be a confluence of things. It might be another project that's better located. And so in terms of creating resiliency across multiple economic cycles, just to ping back to that theme for a second, we want to make sure on these projects that they're really designed so that they have flexibility, so that as markets demand for different uses ebbs and flows, that these projects can end up accommodating those changes in the economic cycle and stay vibrant. Because at the end of the day, everybody wants vibrancy on the street. And it's better to have full space, even if it's not necessarily the retail space that you anticipated might be there. So those are some of the kinds of things that we're talking about with clients all the time.
Well, so that is exactly what we were talking. We had a meeting with the city of San Mateo. This particular property is in San Mateo, and their zoning regulations basically said, okay, yes, you can have mixed use at this particular location, but you have to have first floor retail. And quite frankly, as you say, this particular location does not really lend itself to first floor retail. So then you're kind of stuck trying to convince the city that, okay, so what other use can we put in there that will bring some vibrancy to the first floor and also help the landlord pay his bills?
And so we did a project close to San Mateo, did a retail master plan for downtown San Jose. And the way we approached things in downtown San Jose was to acknowledge that there was probably more retail space or potential retail space than there was demand for at the time that we wrote the study. So we said, okay, we want to protect certain very key locations for retail. And it's okay to say that only retail is going to go in those key locations. But in the other locations, we're going to write a requirement that the space be retail ready, but it doesn't necessarily have to have retail tenants, because you could have an architect's office or a broker's office or something like that would be activating and would bring people onto the street. And as demand for retail increases, as more people are living there and as people are coming back to work, the market will dictate that space will roll over to retail as it makes sense. But meanwhile, we're not letting things that shouldn't happen occur on that key intersection that absolutely has to be retail. That is exactly what the retailer's looking for, and we don't want an office lobby, for example, on the corner that should be a Whole Foods, for example.
Right, the prime location.
Exactly.
Well, and that lends me to this question. I mean, downtown San Mateo actually is in that situation. They have like 700,000 square feet of retail space, which is way too big basically for their market. And early on, pre-dot-com crash, they made an ordinance that office space could not go on the first floor because a bunch of dot-commers were coming in and gobbling up the retail space and obviously reducing the sales tax. So there was this strange balance between, okay, we want retail sales tax, but we can't fill the space with retailers. So anyway, it's an interesting dance that goes on in these situations.
Yeah, no, it always is an interesting dance, and one of the things that I really always am trying to keep in mind and trying to help my clients keep in mind is that retail is demand driven. So if you don't have customers coming in, there's no reason for the retailer to exist. That's what's happened with so many downtowns because of COVID, right?
Right.
People are, return to work is more robust in some places than others, and the retail ecosystem in the places that it's more robust has had a better recovery experience than the places that are less robust on return to work. And it varies by industry, it varies by geography. So things are going to be different from place to place. But as you said, when you just promulgate an ordinance that we're not going to allow X, you got to be really careful that you've taken into account the unintended consequence that if people are not coming back to work and you're in a environment where the tenants can work from anywhere, knowledge workers in the case of San Mateo, for example, that you might end up having legislated vacant space, the unintended consequence. So what they've done is they've unintentionally regulated economic activity. Whereas what they intended to do was regulate away from the negative externality. And so what we're trying to help clients do often is to really focus on the externalities and not regulate economic activity that we all want to have happen.
Right. Well, I mean, certainly San Francisco is in a, I don't know what your current thoughts are on San Francisco, but they certainly have suffered in the downtown area with their retail situation, and their
Well,
vacancy is very high.
yeah, and it's really interesting because, you know, if you read the headlines, San Francisco's a ghost town, but the reality is that San Francisco, in the neighborhoods, is doing really well, and has been doing really well. And but San Francisco's downtown economy was very much tech and financial services driven, and those were two industries that went remote like that and have had a harder time bringing people back to the office because people can function remotely just fine in tech and in financial services. You know, whereas if you go to another city, you might find that the downtown office stock is inhabited by much different industries that end up needing people to be in the office. So we're seeing, I mean, we've seen examples of that all across the country. One very interesting anecdote from a downtown Washington, D.C. developer. We helped do a COVID resilience plan for Washington, D.C.'s central business district during COVID. And this landlord talked about a law firm that was occupying 3 floors on K Street. And it came time for their lease renewal, and they offered their entire back office free relocation to Nashville.
Whoa.
They got to keep their Washington, D.C. salaries. The attorneys were apoplectic because they thought they needed 2 people outside every partner's office in order for things to work well. But the employees ended up going to Nashville with a Washington, D.C. budget. Their quality of life went through the roof. The partners were delighted because the employees were so happy. It didn't matter that the person wasn't sitting right outside their office. And for the owner of the K Street office building, the renewal was not for 3 floors, but for 3/4 of 1 floor. Huge benefit to the law firm, not necessarily a benefit to the office owner.
Right.
Huge benefit to the employees. You know, this kind of retrenching is happening all over the country, and we're not through with it yet.
Well, as you mentioned earlier, one of the hottest places right now is Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Yeah, yeah, we were talking about that before we started, and I just finished a downtown retail strategy for Sioux Falls. Sioux Falls is spectacular. I've been telling people anytime I can get somebody to listen that if you're ever in the area, that it's absolutely worth a weekend. Downtown Sioux Falls, by my count, has 1 chain tenant, and it's an interesting chain tenant, Duluth Clothing, or Duluth Trading Company, in downtown. Every other business is a local independent merchant. There's green space, there's green trail along the river. There is a foodie scene going on in Sioux Falls that I'm going to say a Bay Area foodie would find very interesting. I certainly did.
Wow.
It's just spectacular what's going on there, and which really goes to show you that when you have a long-term vision and you have a champion that really has their eye on the ball and keeps their eye on that ball and knows when to say no and knows when to say yes, and you stick to your guns, that you can really have amazing things happen. I have another client, North Salt Lake City, in the Salt Lake City metropolitan area, and we're working on a plan for them. And same thing, they're much sooner than Sioux Falls. Sioux Falls has been working on this plan for 20 years, but North Salt Lake City, I mean, they have they're sticking to their guns. They know what they want to do, and they know that there's going to be this transition period, but they also know that when they're done with the transition period, they're going to end up having a built form that's really going to be compelling and friendly to pedestrians and to consumers, and that's what they're aiming for. And these plans happen over time. I mean, these things don't happen overnight.
No, they take time and effort and so forth. But I'm curious, in both of those cases, are they restricting heights? Are they restricting things, or are they being a little more open about here we would like you to come to our town. We're trying to make it easy for you to get permits and to get your business going here. What's their attitude?
So, for example, let's go back to North Salt Lake, just because it's such a great example. It's what I would call on the gravity side of the trade area. Everybody going to northern suburbs goes through North Salt Lake, so people who are commuting or traveling through there a lot. So one of the things the city's doing, for example, is they're saying, okay, as you're going to new development, we're requiring a dedication. That dedication means that they can have a street section that's going to work better for retail, wider sidewalks, a landscape median between the curb gutter and the actual sidewalk. So there's some separation between cars and pedestrians. The kinds of things that make it a really comfortable place for pedestrians to hang out, and a sidewalk that's wide enough for a cafe to put some chairs and tables out on the sidewalk, for a retailer to put a display out on the sidewalk. And they know that it's going to be years before all the properties end up redeveloping, and there's this consistent street section all the way from north to south. But they're steadfast that they need to do this in order to create the environment that they ultimately want to have.
So are they making the landowners pay for that, or are they paying for that as a city?
Well, they're requiring the landowner to dedicate so that the street section is wider, so that they can then put in what I like to call a complete sidewalk. We all talk about complete streets. For retail, it's all about the sidewalk. That's where the public realm and the private realm meet. So, we want to have sidewalks that have all the goodies that make them a really inviting place to hang out, to linger for longer. And the longer you can get people to linger, the greater sales will be.
So I'm curious I don't know if I suspect you're familiar with what Burlingame did with their downtown. And it seems to be very successful. I mean, it was a successful street to begin with, and then they changed their sidewalks and parking, and I kind of rolled my eyes like, why are they doing this? But it really
it's working.
Yeah.
So I'm doing some work on the peninsula right now, so of course you've got to be looking at all the downtowns along the peninsula. Burlingame, being a fairly high profile one, and they did a great job on their sidewalk sections. So I think it's a great example. A couple of other things about Burlingame that you'll notice is that they decided not to close the street.
Right.
Traffic is calmed a lot. I mean, it's but they didn't close it, and the street is very jaywalkable. It's very easy to be walking on one side of the street. You see something, and it's easy to get to the other side of the street because you don't have to take your life in your hands to cross the street mid-block. Police departments hate my recommendations sometimes because I advocate jaywalking. But that's what you want for a successful retail district. 4th Street, Berkeley, Burlingame Avenue, College Avenue in Oakland, Willow Glen in San Jose. Take your pick, but they're all jaywalkable.
Whereas San Mateo,
depends on the street,
your life
right?
In your hands jaywalking in San Mateo.
Well, it depends. I mean, if you're on D Street, it's much different than if you're on B.
Oh, that's true. So you haven't gotten involved in the 2 blocks on B Street that they closed up?
Well, so San Mateo, so okay, another interesting point. Some retail districts are linear, right? They're corridors, and
Right.
others are more of a grid. San Mateo's is more of a grid. So the
Yeah.
street closure in San Mateo has a much smaller impact on the retail ecosystem. It's easier to harvest benefits from the street closure than if you just have a corridor and you close the corridor down.
Right. I see what you're saying. That's very interesting. So going on the flip side here, which we talked about a little bit earlier, is Boulder, Colorado. So Boulder, from my vantage point, yeah, I mean, you've got all the gravity, you've got all the people want to go there. It's a great place to live. It's got green belts. It's very eco-centric. It's got all kinds of runners, yada, yada, yada. But they, it seems, have become so restrictive in their requirements that it's made it very difficult for retailers to come into Boulder.
So, it's really interesting that you bring up Boulder. So, a couple of points. I did a citywide retail strategy for Boulder a few years ago. And so first thing, Boulder is a much more suburban built form than people tend to realize. You've got the center of the city, which is, very walkable. But once you get past that, Boulder is more auto-oriented than I think people tend to expect, and certainly than I think Boulder's sensibility wants. But you do have a lot of people coming to downtown, if you will. Pearl Street's the street everybody knows about. Pearl Street's closed in a pedestrian mall, I think from 11th to 15th.
Right.
The more interesting, diverse retail tends to be between 8th and 11th and 15th and 20th, and not on the part that's closed.
That's true. Yeah.
And then Boulder also has a fairly robust regulatory environment. And as Boulder has been consumed, if you will, by the greater Denver area, it's not an exurb anymore at all. People have other options for shopping, and retailers are looking up and saying, okay, wait a minute, we have other options for shopping where there is a friendlier regulatory environment, and it's also, as a result of that, less expensive. And so part of what Boulder is trying to figure out, and one of the things that we studied and made recommendations about, was how do you make changes within Boulder so that you reestablish a really unique, differentiated environment that really can attract retailers, and that will, and because you have a more diverse array of retailers, will then continue to attract consumers from outside of the city as a destination.
Well, I think in thinking about this, I all of a sudden realized that Denver, in my mind, has been a very big success story in terms of retail, in terms of Lodo and this train station and the ballpark being downtown.
I know.
I mean, I grew up in Boulder, and Denver was kind of the terrible place to go.
Right.
But now it's kind of reverse of that. Denver is much more interesting in some ways than Boulder is.
Oh, I mean, Denver has, so, there's some cities that have a collection of great neighborhoods, and Denver's one of them.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, Lodo, Rhino, I mean, all the ones that you've heard about, but many, many, many others. And, but one thing that's very interesting is the mall downtown is really struggling. The other neighborhoods that we're all talking about, have really come into their own and are destinations in their own right. So, Denver's very much in flux, from that perspective. And then, you've got Cherry Creek, you've got a lot of other areas. I've done a lot of work in and around the Denver market, and it's really very interesting because there are a lot of communities that are trying to create their own sense of places. Castle Rock and Parker are two great examples.
Oh, yeah. Right. Yeah, no, that's very intriguing. So, Yeah, well, this is a fantastic conversation. I think we could go on for another couple days about this, but I think for now we'll end. Maybe we'll come back and talk again here soon. So how would people reach you, David?
Well, my website is right there with my name on the bottom of the screen, www.greensfelder.net, and my contact information is there. You can also reach me at my office at 415-696-6767 or via email at david@greensfelder.net.
Fantastic. Well, for all of you listeners that want to know more about retail, I highly recommend that you call David or talk to him very soon. It's a crazy, wild market right now. So I think with that, we'll end and go from there.
Well, that sounds great. Thanks, Bruce, and would love to do it again sometime.
That's a wrap on today's journey through the SF commercial real estate scene. Ready to share your story? Visit sfcommercialconversations.com/guest. Your insights could lead the next conversation.